To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Tonight we are looking forward already to hearing about budget conditions, the backdrop against which the superintendent's budget is being developed. Thank you very much. We look forward to that. And before we turn our attention to that discussion, I will pause for board announcements, if we have any board announcements this evening.
I do.
Please.
There was apparently a wonderful event at the high school on Friday where the volleyball team competed against a number of other teams. I was told by my son that board members were not allowed to attend, which I checked with Dr. Siciliano and found out to be false. But it sounds like a wonderful event, and congratulations to the girls volleyball team for prevailing.
Wonderful. Thank you, Liz. Any other announcements today? Thank you to our John Jay High School for Veterans Club for hosting our community veterans. I know many of us had the opportunity to be there and to meet some of our local veterans and to thank them for their service. And thank you to Dr. Siciliano for his lovely words, and to our student leaders for bringing that event together. The Field of Honor was beautiful and we appreciated being included. So thank you. Any other announcements before we invite Andrew to share with us some announcements? Okay, thank you so much, Andrew. We look forward to hearing from you.
A few updates tonight. First one on the topic of vaccinations. I've been writing about this a little bit to the community recently, and there's some questions around it, so I wanted to provide a little bit more information tonight. And this is specific to the vaccinations more recently made available to 5 to 11-year-olds in the country. As I've said, I think in communications to the community, Westchester County reached out to us and asked us to gather from each school district from their communities, what's the level of interest in your community. So we conducted a survey here, and we've gotten close now to about 600 students. The families of close to about 600 students have indicated that they would be interested if there were to be a vaccine clinic here at school for their children to be vaccinated in that way. I've since tried to give a note of caution to families not to be waiting for this if that's their interest, because we haven't yet heard back from the county, not through any fault of their own. We know that they're very busily engaged and doing the best they can. I did want to share that more recently today, in fact, I heard that they're now scheduling appointments into January with school districts, and we don't have a date as yet. So again, I just want to make clear to families that if that's a priority for a family, there are other means by which to try to seek that vaccine. I think I shared one of the websites through which that could happen by an email earlier this week. And from everything that we've heard, if there is to be a clinic here, it would take place after school. Parents would accompany their children. I've had some questions about that, so I want to clarify that. Parents would accompany their children, and the event would be facilitated by staff from Westchester County. So as soon as we know any more on that, we do keep in close contact with the county, and we'll see if we're able to facilitate that. We know that it's begun to happen in a couple of other districts more to the south of us, but perhaps, and we hope that it may work its way up here for the sake of all of those families that have expressed interest. On a different but related topic, I wanted to talk about another item that's been a little bit in the news, also in the same COVID world, which is the phrase "test to stay." And I want to just define that a little bit because people have maybe read about it from other states. So there's this practice in some other states. It hasn't found its way very much into New York yet, called test to stay, which is a practice by which if a student were exposed to COVID, not that they had COVID, but if they were exposed to it and as a result would need to quarantine, test to stay is a protocol that would allow them to continue coming to school if each day they were able to take a rapid test for, I believe, for 7 consecutive days, have a negative result from that rapid test, then they would be able to come to school. Recently, maybe a couple of weeks ago, New York State Department of Health put out a memo to say they are not recommending test to stay as a protocol. And in the very same memo, they said, however, local county departments of health could make their own decisions on this one. So whereas throughout COVID, we've had some decisions that came from the state, we've had others that were handed off more locally. This was one that was handed off more locally. And since that's happened, I would say where we are with Westchester County is we don't have exactly clear information from Westchester County on whether this is to be a practice or not in our county. They've given some indication that they might be willing to support it, but if you look closely at the language from New York State, sorry, let me rephrase that. They haven't actually necessarily, they've indicated that they might be willing to allow schools to do this individually, but they haven't indicated that they would support it. If you look at the language from the state, it seems to indicate the county would have to support it for the schools to be able to do it. So we're not in, I would say we're in a sort of a limbo on test to stay as to whether that's something that's going to happen or not. We are taking the steps that we think might be necessary just to be prepared in the event it should come to be. We want, if New York State were to announce it as a practice moving forward, we would want to be ready. But nothing is happening or moving forward at this point, which from my conversations with colleagues in neighboring districts seems to be consistent with what's happening around us, that people are trying to think about what would it take, how would it happen, would we be ready to do it if it comes to be, because it's like so many other things, it's complicated and not something that schools are in the practice of doing, but we're looking at how it could happen if it comes to pass. So probably more information on that to come perhaps at a future point. I'll keep certainly the board and the whole community apprised if we learn more about that. Then the next item goes back to a letter that I sent to the community late in August regarding a number of matters related to special education. Obviously, a topic that we've been hearing and discussing quite a lot at board meetings of late. Back in August, I sent a letter to the community in which I said, among other things, we would be seeking a consultant with expertise in autism to visit our schools. And I'm really thrilled to share tonight, and we've already shared this with some members of our community at the end of last week, that tomorrow, in fact, we will be having a visit from Dr. Fred Volkmar. And I'm going to, forgive me for reading this next part, but Dr. Volkmar is the Irving B. Harris Professor of Child Psychiatry, Pediatrics, and Psychology at Yale University. And he's the director of the autism program at Yale's Child Study Center. For many years, he was the director of the Child Study Center itself. He was the primary author of the section on autism and pervasive developmental disorders in the American Psychiatric Association DSM Volume 4. He's also the author of numerous other books on autism. He speaks and consults regularly on the topic and has written many scholarly articles. He is highly regarded in this field, and we feel incredibly fortunate that he has agreed to come and spend time with us. This is really a tremendously exciting opportunity for us to learn from someone of this magnitude and someone of this expertise. In my initial conversations with him, he also seems just like a lovely person, down to earth, engaging, thoughtful, humble for someone who's as clearly as smart as he is. So very excited to meet him tomorrow. We've had a few conversations. Tomorrow we have our first time meeting. He's going to visit 3 of our classrooms tomorrow. He'll have a chance to see students and teachers working together, and we'll have an opportunity to spend some time with him at the end of the day. And then at the end of that visit, we'll think about what comes next. He was very clear in saying to us, we don't lay out a whole plan now. Let me come and see, and then we'll talk and see what makes sense after that. So that approach makes a lot of sense to me. As I indicated in an email to some of our families last week, he's also agreed to spend time with staff after this visit, to be in conversation with them, to share his expertise with them, to answer questions that they might have. And then also really exciting, he's agreed to speak with our parents and again to share his expertise. He is somebody that you can certainly read a lot about. He has a lot out there already. You can actually watch him speaking on YouTube quite a bit. He does speak frequently and has for a long time. He's very passionate, obviously, about this field and has made a huge contribution in this field also. So we feel really lucky. We don't We don't by any means think that one day, a one-day visit is an answer to anything. It's the beginning, we hope, of something that will be really fruitful for the district. And we're really excited to have established this partnership and look forward to hearing from him and meeting him tomorrow. So I'm really excited about that. My colleagues are, our colleagues in the special ed department who helped with this process are very excited to meet him. So we look forward to that for tomorrow.
Terrific. Thank you
And
so
more
much.
to come on that, I'm sure.
Wonderful. Yeah, we thank you for that. Thank you for all of the updates, and we are thrilled that Dr. Volkmar is coming tomorrow. This is an enormous opportunity. We have a celebrity scholar coming to engage in conversation with us to help us understand what we're doing well and where we can improve, and that's an extraordinary opportunity. So thank you very much. We look forward to hearing more about that and about next steps. And I do just want to pause because these were some substantive updates and there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
Just to ask if board members have any questions or clarifying comments, concerns, things they want to follow up on vis-a-vis COVID. Yeah. please.
Is there a better person that we could have found other than Dr. Volkmar? I mean, isn't this guy the sort of preeminent, most accomplished person in this field?
He doesn't strike me as the kind of person who would describe himself that way, but I think he certainly is up there among those people. Yeah.
Okay, so that's super exciting. And he's
Yeah.
coming tomorrow for one day, and then will there be a report out afterwards, or do we remain engaged with him, or he'll provide some recommendations?
Yeah, as I said, we will speak with him tomorrow. He wanted to come and be able to see what there is, what's going on, and have a chance to see our classrooms, and then think about what would make sense after that. So we'll be doing that.
Fantastic.
That's great.
Thank you.
Yes, please, Alana.
Thank you for sharing all the information around COVID and kind of where we are and what we're doing with that. I really appreciate hearing about all the preparedness that you're doing around the test to stay, even if it doesn't become a program. And also just really appreciate all the information and resources that have been shared around, as vaccination becomes available to more and more of our students. It's so wonderful that the district's been so proactive on that. And I just wanted to share a couple thoughts related to that. I recently met a woman who had polio as a child, and she shared with me that she felt the most proud and the happiest when she took her child to get vaccinated. Because it was something that she knew that her kids wouldn't have to suffer the way that she had suffered. She was in an iron lung for 3 months, sort of didn't remember it, and that had sort of disassociated the entire experience. But that when she did that, she felt sort of not only was she taking care of her kids, but she was making sure that other kids wouldn't get that. And I just learned right before this meeting that when the polio vaccine came out, Westchester County participated in a study to make sure, to test it out, and that we had a super high, enrollment in that study. So there's a real history of participating in vaccination and in efforts to make sure that vaccination is safe in this county. And I'm really glad that that's kind of continuing with the county, and that there was so much interest among our community in doing vaccination. I just wanted to share that I got my kids, I have 3 children, and 2 of them, I took them to get vaccinated a couple of weeks ago. And I said to them, I'm so happy today. And it's not just because you guys are safer, but you're helping to keep your sister safer who can't get vaccinated. You're helping to keep your grandparents safer. You're helping to keep your aunt safer who's immunocompromised because she's going through chemo right now. You're helping to keep our neighbors who are in their 80s, in their 90s safer. We're doing our part for our family, for our community, for our town, for our county, for our city, for our state, and for our country. And I think that in the midst of, we're kind of, that this message of doing our part is so important to kind of keep getting out there. And I really wanted to communicate that to my kids, that the vaccination is not just for them, but it's an act of caring for our community. And we're still in the midst of a pandemic, even though we would like to be past it, but people are still dying every day from this. And through science and through efforts, we have a vaccine that now works, and that is now available to all of our children. And so I think one of the things that's so exciting that now the best way that we can keep our kids in school is to help them get vaccinated, right? When we're kind of worried about quarantining, but as the rules are that if if your child is vaccinated and they get exposed and they're asymptomatic, they don't have to quarantine, so they get to stay in school more days. So I just wanted to kind of underline that a little bit more. And yeah, that I hope that we continue to be, a leader and a source of information around COVID safety and around COVID vaccination up here.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, great. Then I think we are ready to turn our attention to tonight's conversation related to budget conditions for the 2022-2023 school year.
Thanks, Marjorie. In a moment, I'm going to
Just
turn
gonna
over
grab the clicker from Maureen
to
tonight.
Maureen. So
And
this
I'm
is
on the other side.
this is a presentation that we've been doing each year. At this time of year, quite honestly, it's a little bit earlier this year. We usually do this in December, trying to wait for the numbers to become as close to final as possible. This is a presentation in which we talk not about the school budget itself, but about the conditions in the world around us that come to impact the school budget. So one of the reasons you'll hear more about that we're doing this earlier this year, and I'm sure people have been reading and hearing about this in the news, the consumer price index, which has a significant impact on the school tax cap, has been running so significantly higher this year and particularly recently than in prior years, that we are in a place with some of the numbers to be more definitive tonight than we were at this time in other years. So we thought, let's do this a little bit earlier because it's an important meeting for us tonight, because we ask you tonight for any guidance that you might want to give us, particularly if there's anything different from the goal that you set at the beginning of the year. We would want to know that tonight because we've already begun, and Danelle and her office have already begun the process of developing next year's budget. So we share these conditions tonight, and then we ask for your feedback if there is any. It doesn't have to be any change, but if there is any, we'd like to know that tonight. So if we move to the next slide. Oh, here we go. So tonight, as we just said, the purpose, we're going to present very briefly the drivers that shape any school budget. It's kind of a generic look at how school budgets are made up. And then we're going to give you a preview to the extent that we can of the conditions that are going to influence revenue and expenditures in the coming year to the extent that we know it. And then we seek your guidance as we continue into the budget development process in earnest before we finally present you the first draft of our budget, which happens in February. Moving on to the next slide here, you see the things, these haven't changed from year to year because these really are the major components of a school budget. Obviously, this program that we offer, tremendously important. We look each year to think about whether that we need to have any new programs, whether we need to refine any old programs. Sometimes if there are new programs, they take the place of older programs. So we think a lot about that. Professional learning is always an important piece of our ongoing work to get better. Dr. Volkmar's visit tomorrow would fall into that category of significant professional learning for us. Enrollment and class size are a huge component in the budget. You'll hear a little bit later tonight that staffing and the benefits that go along with staffing are by far the largest component of any school budget, and those are driven very directly by enrollment and class size. And then infrastructure, the physical conditions in which we hold this meeting, in which we hold our classes, the technology that's necessary for our students, and more recently, COVID awareness and any impact of the ongoing pandemic and any need for infrastructural changes as a result of that. So those four things are the major drivers of any budget. The next slide reminds the board of the goal that you set back at the very beginning of this school year. And this is the one that we want. We want to be sure that you're still comfortable with this as your goal. Once you hear the conditions, if anything changes, we would want to know about that tonight. But just to remind you, you said that your goal would be to adopt a budget that's fiscally responsible and does not exceed the tax cap. We strive towards sustainable contracts and strengthened partnerships and managing the district's infrastructure and human resources in an equitable, responsible, safe, and sustainable manner that considers demographic trends and financial analysis. So again, we'll come back at the end of the presentation and ask you, now that you've heard this, is there anything about that goal you would want to change? And with that, I'll turn over to Danelle. Thanks, Danelle.
Thank you.
Sure. So I'd like to go through the composition of the school budget. Basically, it is a balancing system. So we have our revenues. Our revenues must equal any expenditures moving forward or our budget moving forward. So to start to review our revenues, this slide shows us where the major funding of our revenue sources
And it's no surprise that real property tax is the major funding for our school district. You can see in the last 2 years, it's ranged from rounding 88%. The next highest level of revenue source is our state aid. So in 2021, it was 7.45% of our revenue sources, and this current year is 7.32%. That little dip had to do with the way the federal government allocated some of the COVID relief funds to us in prior year. That was to help offset our general fund revenue. And in this current year, that's being placed in a different bucket called the special aid fund or the federal aid fund. And it doesn't offset our revenue, and it really goes to the programs within that federal aid fund. Next on the list is the use of our reserves and fund balance. So we've been able to use our reserves in a sustainable way, and that hovers in that 2.8% range. And finally, the last revenue source is others, and that's where our interest income, sales tax, rental income, and other miscellaneous revenue comes from. I'll speak a little bit more of those other revenue sources in this next slide. So some other factors include interest rates. You can see on this slide from December of 2018, the drastic increase or decrease that we've seen in our interest income. So we are limited on how we can invest our funds because it is taxpayers' funds. We must invest them in a fiduciary responsible way. So we were receiving 2% interest rates in 2018, and now we've seen that significantly decline. County sales tax also fluctuates. That's another major source of our revenue in that other category. So a few years ago, the county did raise their sales tax. They also changed the calculation factor of how they distribute sales tax to school districts. So we receive a portion of the sales tax. So we continue to monitor that. We did see a slight uptick in that a few years back. Refund from BOCEs are unknown. So BOCEs, as you know, is a consortium. They are not permitted to make a profit. So any savings that they see in one particular year, we get refunded in the next year, as all of their component districts do get refunded. Reserves. So we finalize our reserves in June by the Board of Ed. And like I mentioned in our previous slide, we continue to use those in a sustainable way. And then fund balance. So any fund balance at the end of the year, the board reviews that and finalizes that in July prior to setting the tax levy. And then other revenue sources, as I mentioned before, are rental income and other miscellaneous sources. I don't foresee that those are changing or having any big variances. State aid is also listed on this slide. So we have two types of state aid that we receive. One is an expense-driven aid, and that is based on our actual expenses in certain categories. And then an aid ratio is applied to that. So when we expend more in some of those categories, our state aid will fluctuate. And then the other type of state aid we receive is called foundation aid, and that's a calculation from the state. State aid is still unknown because it's based on the governor's budget. And we watch that carefully. Those figures, usually we start to hear where they're at later on throughout the budget process. So in our different scenarios, I've kept state aid the same, thinking moving forward in tax cap calculation. So that gets us to tax cap calculation. When the tax cap first came out, there was some misinformation that was confusing, and some people believed in this 2% cap rule. It's not actually a 2% cap on tax on your tax levy. There's a calculation that is involved. The calculation, as Andrew mentioned before, part of it is using CPI. So in that calculation, we look at CPI or 2%, whichever is lower, and that's how we start the calculation. So this year, the reason we're able to present this a little earlier is we see CPI trending well above that 2%. Another factor that is part of the tax cap calculation is called assessment growth factor. So this is brick and mortar construction that happens within our school district. The Office of Real Property Tax Services is the one that tells us what our assessment growth factor is. That figure usually comes out early next month, and that's what we'll use in the tax cap calculation. Just to explain that brick and mortar construction and how that growth factor is, if your house has been reassessed for some reason and your assessment goes up or down, that doesn't play a part in that tax growth factor. What it is if you have a vacant piece of land next door to you, your neighbor buys it, builds a house, that's brick and mortar. That will affect the assessment rolls, and the calculation has it takes that into consideration, those brick and mortar constructions. So with that, since it's early on, we know that 2%, that CPI will be capped at that 2% as part of the calculation. And this slide kind of walks you through where we were last year. And under the assumption that that growth factor would remain the same as it was in prior year, this gives us a picture of what our cap could potentially be. And that winds up being about a little over $3 million. So on the third line up, we see our tax cap budget capacity. So in 2021, it was actually higher than what we wound up with our budget. And our difference was 2.3 million. And then this year in 22-23, or moving forward, we could potentially have an increase of $3 million and still remain underneath that tax cap, pending what the final numbers are on our assessment growth factor. So I mentioned in the previous slide that our budget is balanced. So we've spoken a little bit about our revenue side. So now we know what our potential cap could be. And I'm going to speak a little bit about our expenditure side. So this is a graph here of where exactly our expenses are in our budget. You can see salary and benefits are our primary sources. Debt is a known cost that doesn't fluctuate from year to year. Debt. It's similar to your mortgage payment. We took on debt a few years ago. I should say it can fluctuate when that debt falls off. We don't project that this year to be falling off. We have a few more years of debt that we've taken on from construction projects in prior years. EPC projects, 1996 renovations, we're still paying for those. And then supplies, material, utilities, textbooks, etc. Those make up the other portion of the budget. So we have contractually obligated expenses of salary and benefits that make up 81.9% of our budgets. We're currently in negotiation with our union. So those numbers for next year might not look the same as 54.2 and 27.7, but that's what they are currently. And those are numbers that we're just contractually obligated to pay. The other expenditure conditions, so the benefits is 27.7% of those contractually obligated items. Health insurance is the biggest portion of that. So our health insurance works on a calendar year premium. The premiums have not been disclosed for what it will be for 2022. So here we are in November, and we're trying to project out 2022 expenses and half of 2023 expenses. When I look back and I see what the increases have been averaged over the last 5 years, it seems to be about 5% increases in our health insurance. So if we compound that from this year's expenses and then moving forward to 2023 and look what those potential expenses could be, we're looking at upwards of 800,000. So of that $3 million that we could potentially go to our tax cap, right off the bat, $800,000 is being consumed by health insurance. Of course, next month, when we get those premiums, we'll reevaluate those numbers. We'll look more closely at those numbers. And then we'll also be able to project out 2023 rates based on updated trends. Under New York state law, we are required as a school district to contribute to employees' retirement systems. We have 2 retirement systems that we contribute to. The first is teachers' retirement system. They have put out their projected rates, and they are showing anywhere from a 2 to 7% increase in their projected rates. And then our non-instructional staff are part of what's called New York State local employees retirement system. They are projecting a decrease in their rates, but their fiscal year runs differently than our fiscal year, and they haven't released their final quarter rates. So that's still an unknown for us. And then finally, in the benefits category, we do contribute as an employer a 6.2% towards Social Security wages. And each year we watch what the cap is on those Social Security wages. And it's increasing about 4,200 for those staff members that would reach that threshold. Finally, in our expenditure conditions, I spoke a little bit about debt. We have principal and interest payments. Those are stable. We have a debt schedule, so we know what those are, but we are obligated to pay that. It's important to note when we do get those final allowable growth factor and we finalize the tax cap calculation, that debt is removed from that calculation. And then we calculate a certain portion of it, and then we add back in the debt. The reason that is the state understands that debt is a stable payment, and that we have to account for it somehow. So that is excluded from the tax cap calculation. And then another thing that we should just be aware of for expenditures is that the latest CPI as of October 2021, the 12-month total is 4.3% increase. And that's going to affect our supplies, our contract services, our fuel, our heating. We are going to be impacted. So that's that 15.7% that we're not contractually obligated to pay, but we will be seeing increases. We anticipate increases based on CPI increases. Will it be 4.3% increases? We're hoping not, but we will see some increases in that. I clicked one too fast. So as we move forward in the budget process, we will continue to look at each individual code. We are currently carefully reviewing this with each principal, each director. We've started our meetings individually with them. We will continue those meetings throughout the budget process with our central office review team. And I've also started meeting with them individually, answering any questions, and our business office team is really working together with them. So what is our, still we have some unknowns. State aid, we are still closely monitoring that for any changes in state aid. BOCES expenses, so I mentioned BOCES as a consortium. They do charge us for services. They help us out a lot with instructional pupil services, anything from technology to our financial software runs through BOCES. They have a higher purchasing power and can often get us a more effective price because they are working with the 18 component districts. And they will work closely with us throughout the budget process, and they do give us a budget that we vote on in April for all of the component districts. Finally, the retirement system, contributions that I spoke to before, still, they still haven't been finalized, so that is an unknown in the budget conditions. Contractual obligations, we're currently working with our unions. Health insurance rates, both for 2022 and in the 2023 line. And then finally, that tax base growth factor, and that should come out shortly. See, I think with that, Andrew wanted to speak to the last few slides.
Thanks again, Danelle, very much for all of that. So as Danelle's mentioned, we now start to look ahead to next year. We're just beginning this process with our building administrators, our department administrators, our teachers become involved in this too. And we look at all the different programs from curriculum needs, technology maintenance, programmatic changes, individual student needs, facility maintenance, and COVID if continues to have an impact for us. And we then use those things to design the budget. Moving on to I think what might be the last slide or the second to last slide. It's in late February. You can see here, we'll be coming to you with the draft of the budget. So that's again why we're hoping to hear tonight whether there's any really significant change in your guidance to us or not, because late February is not that far away for us. There's a lot of work that goes into developing the budget, and we would hate to develop it with one guiding principle in mind, only to find out later on that actually the guiding principle has changed. So if there are thoughts tonight, we'd love to hear them. We begin in February. We do the all-day Saturday budget session on February 26th, and then we continue into March as needed, and then we look to adopt. And sometimes we also think about when that state aid number is finalized as we try to work those final dates. There are required public hearings of the budget within a certain time frame connected to the vote itself. And then you can see that the vote, which is set statewide, the vote happens on the same day in every school district in New York State, is on May 17th of the next school year. And that does bring us to the last slide, and we would love to hear your questions, and we want to answer them as best we can, and then hear whether there is any change in your guidance to us or not.
Great. Thank you both so much. We really appreciate the preview of the conditions that you're working within. And that we have plenty of time to get our thoughts together before you bring us back the proposed budget in February. So thank you for that. And it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to board colleagues for questions, comments. Sure, go ahead, Ilana.
A couple clarifying questions. Thank you. That was, very helpful. And on the income side, curious about what you spoke a little bit why the interest has declined so much. And just to clarify, is our investment just ourselves as a district, or is it a larger fund that we're investing?
So we are only permitted to invest in money market accounts and then checking accounts.
Oh.
And there's also collateralization that's involved. So once you have collateralization involved, interest rates seem a lot lower than what you might be receiving at your own personal bank. And that's because we need to have our money insured. So yeah, we go under the parameters that we're permitted to. So we don't pool our money with another district. We do happen to use some of the banks that other districts use. We use Signature Bank and Chase Commercial.
And then I was also curious about, we just kind of go back a little bit. I wasn't fully following the growth assessment part of the tax cap calculation. How that.
Right. So we start with our prior year, our current year levy, I should say.
Yeah.
When we're working in between 2 years, I'm already thinking it's 2022, 23. So we start with our current year levy. And then what we do is we look at the growth assessment value. In prior year, let me see if I can get you back to that slide. In prior years, it has been about 1.018%. So that's, I think that was the last year was.
And Danelle, just to be clear, that number is just given to us by the assessor.
Yes.
We have no say over it.
Right.
It's a percentage that's
Yeah.
told to us.
Yeah, so in this slide here, you can see it's ranged from 1.0041. And last year was 1.0108. So that Office of Real Property Taxes up in Albany gets the information from the town assessor's office. And they see what brick and mortar construction has occurred within our school district. And each school district is given that assessment growth factor. So we start with our prior year tax levy or our current year tax levy and multiply that assessment growth factor in. And then there's some exclusion, that those debt service exclusions that I spoke about, we take out our debt. And then we have what's called, our base number. And we're able to add in that CPI or the 2% cap, whichever way it may be. And then once we have that number, we add back in that debt. And that gives us our allowable, our tax cap.
So it's a combination,
Yes.
CPI and the factors. But they're just to kind of understand the big picture of where we think we're going with this, because CPI is so high, we would anticipate that the tax cap is sort of regardless of the assessment growth factor, or would that
Is-
change this potentially?
Yeah,
If the
will-
growth factor came
Yeah.
back extremely low or something?
Right.
I
So in
think-
my calculation, I did the growth factor exactly the same as what it was in prior year, just to have that base number.
Yeah.
But if our growth factor is extremely less, it's then that will make our tax cap less. If it's, I don't think it can ever go in the negative direction.
Okay.
I've never seen it go in the negative direction. You can see that Westchester County currently their growth factor is 1.0058. So the county in its whole is showing growth. So I would anticipate some growth. If it's going to be the same growth as last year, that's unclear. I don't usually see that it repeats itself, but it will be somewhere within that variance. So
Now,
that final number will change.
if we go back to slide 9 for a minute, which is the one that shows the 21, 22 and the 20, yeah, that one. And the difference we're showing there on the bottom right of $3 million.
Mhm.
Is it fair to say that the bulk of that is a result of the 2%
Yes.
tax? And then some portion of it is a result of the assessment growth factor, and that's the part we don't know yet. So it could be a little bit more than $3 million. It could be a little bit less than $3 million, but it's not going to be hugely less.
Right. Right. I don't anticipate it fluctuating too much.
Okay.
And can you explain again, just those two bottom lines before the difference? The total budget capacity, capped budget capacity is what we could have in revenue if, no.
No, what we
Or-
could spend.
It's what we could, it would be our budget, our expenditure budget.
Right. So
Because the tax levy would be $2 million more.
So
yeah,
then-
so
our top
I'll
column.
let
Yeah.
them,
sorry.
no, please,
Go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Dina.
So our current budget, which is 113,242,880.
Yeah.
That's our current budget. But in this scenario, it's in the prior budget column only because we're showing 2 years there. So in 2022, that will be our prior budget. We could go up to 116,299,036 under this calculation. And last year, our prior year budget was 111,472,680. We could have gone up to 113,869,229. We did not go up to the max of our cap. We went slightly up under, I believe it was like 689,000 under what our full cap.
May I ask you a question? Just a clarifying question. I think I heard you say that of the $3 million approximately, you were estimating, and I understand it's an estimate, that 800,000 would potentially be allocated to the increase in health insurance, not our total outlay of health insurance, but that you're anticipating approximately an $800,000 increase in our
If-
health insurance costs.
Right, if
correct?
the trends continue the
trends
way they have
continue.
been previously.
Mhm.
I just wanted to give the board a picture of, just because we say 3 million, it doesn't mean that we
Right.
can be buying all new supplies and textbooks and furniture. It does get, a portion of that is we're obligated to pay for this benefits.
I appreciate
And
that.
then there is salary increases. We are in negotiations with the union. I don't want to speak too much of that, but we do anticipate
Yes.
that there would be salary increases associated.
Thank you. My question actually was, we also have some information here about the anticipated increase to TRS.
Mhm.
And I wondered if you could put a dollar number to that in the same way that you were able to say it's approximately $800,000 of the increase that would be of the 3 million. My impression is that that increase to TRS could also be a
Mhm.
sizable number. So I'm just trying to
Right.
add 800,000 to the TRS increase, which maybe is much less sizable, and then back that out from the 3 million to see what's left over.
So TRS gave us a range of, so they're currently at 9.8% is the TRS
Mhm.
rate. And they anticipate it being either 10 or 10.5%. So
Okay.
that 0.5% is significant. So that could range anywhere from $100,000 to $350,000.
Okay,
But it's slightly offset by that decrease in the ERS rate. That's the employee, the non-instructional staff.
yes,
Their employee contribution rate is dropping.
thank you. Can I just ask you to repeat what you just said in light of on the benefits slide where it says New York State retirement system are projected to increase 2.04% to 7.14%?
Right. So when you so 9.8%, if you divide that by the 10%, it's going up it looks like it's 2%, but
Oh, I see. This
It's
is,
7% of 9.
yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
thank
Yeah.
you, thank you. That's.
Thank
I'm-
you.
I'm with
It's
you.
hard for me to
Thank you so much. Okay, and you
to
said the
change that
number,
number in my mind to words.
that's great.
So
And the
thank
number
you.
was somewhere you said between 100,000 and 300,000.
Yeah.
Okay, great, but a little bit offset by
350.
ERS going down. Perfect. Thank you so much.
But potentially, I mean, I guess if we wanted to go sort of worst case scenario, 1 million of the 3 million will be
Yes.
employee benefits and retirement system.
Can I just mention one other thing on this very note? Because you mentioned, New York State recognizing that debt is a stable payment and is excluded. I just wanted to mention that, like at the regional level, there is some talk among school boards about asking the state to exempt large increases in healthcare and pension funds. And I didn't know whether in your professional organization, is this a conversation at all among assistant superintendents for business?
So within the calculation, there is an exclusion for retirement. This scenario doesn't reach that exclusion. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. I don't know if it's a 10, once it reaches over 10% increase, you can exclude
That's
it.
great.
But from when I was doing this calculation, this current increase did not meet that criteria.
And nothing
it
for
is-
healthcare.
And nothing for healthcare that is in the calculation currently, but I will certainly bring that up at my next association meeting.
That'd be awesome.
Yes, to,
Thank you. Then we could be aligned in something that we're trying to
right,
get some visibility,
yes.
raise awareness. Thank you. Because that's a big number, 800,000 in an
Mhm.
increase, potentially. Other questions?
Yeah, I've got a
comments?
couple of questions,
Please.
Marjorie, if that's good. Last year, we kind of struggled with state aid because the governor wasn't very clear about what the impact of COVID might be, and there was a lot of questions around state aid. I feel like that's stabilized this year. It seems from the presentation you've given that it seems to be more stable this year than it was last. Are we fairly confident in what that state aid percentage will be?
There hasn't been too much talk around state aid. I can tell you that the ARP money, which is being into that federal bucket of funds, I think the state is using that as, hey, we're giving you a little bit more
Right.
funds. But really, it's way early in the budget process. But we will continue to monitor it.
We're
We get
not
some reports
worried.
in January. The state waits for our finalized reports, like a November 30th is our cutoff to make some state reportings. And then at November 30th, they start looking at our calculations, our expense-driven aid.
Understood.
especially-
But
So,
we're not, there's no, as there was last year, there's no indication that our state aid will be reduced at this point. There was a lot of talk about this last December. We were quite worried that it might be substantially decreased, but there's nothing
Right.
at this time,
indicating at this
yeah,
time that.
at
may
this
be-
time, and
There was talk of it because of the potential budget crisis up at the
Right.
state level, and they thought they might have to take money back from schools at one point.
Right.
We're not hearing any
Not
of that
there.
kind of conversation at the moment. Yeah.
And in fact, 2 years ago, I was reviewing some of my notes from 2 years ago, and there was a talk about state aid being reduced 2 years ago at this point
But
of the
we'll
game.
come
So
from
we're
that.
not hearing those big headline articles yet.
And then staying on the revenue side, we have, I think your number was about 2.9%, which translates to about $4 million in revenue. That's attributable to fund balance and reserves.
Yeah, 2 point, yeah. 2.8.
So I know it's common practice to use our reserves year over year and maybe refund them and to essentially move money in and out of our reserves. As we begin to design the budget for next year, are we considering, or is it a best practice even to try to allocate funds directly to the line items that we think we may ultimately fund from the reserve pools towards the end of the year as we do, rather than shift money into reserves? And maybe that's not a one for tonight. I'm happy to take that offline with you, but do
Yes.
you follow my question? I mean, so I'm just, as we think about the budget, like typically what happens is towards the end of the year, our reserve funds are quite high and we transfer money out of them to other projects or other work. And I don't know if it's best practice to consider funding those line items directly at the beginning of the year during the budget process versus waiting until we've sort of now in the year and we think, oh, okay, we'll use some fund transfers. Probably really good reasons to allocate those funds into the fund balances and reserve accounts. Probably is, I don't know, but do you, and I don't want to put you on the spot, obviously, but
No, so that's almost a behind the scenes when we're planning the budget and looking at the revenue. For example, this year we used $35,000 out of the employee unemployment reserve.
right.
I would never create an unemployment line, or I could not create an unemployment line that was less than 35,000. So when
see.
when I'm creating the budget, I'm looking at unemployment and saying, historically it's been 40,000 or 70,000 or whatever it was for the historical years. And we have this reserve fund. So let's plan on using a portion of that reserve to offset that expense. So our reserves, we do look at it in that perspective. And
Gotcha.
and plan to use those reserves, because the reserves, as you're aware, we can only use them for specific purposes.
Right, very specific.
And we keep track of them. So we plan to use them. And then usually what happens at the end of the year is we say we've used these reserves, but we would never want to be in a position to have $0 in those reserves, because
Understood.
reserves is really our rainy day or our savings account.
Yep.
So we then try to backfill or increase our reserves.
Very good. And then I think maybe, and this is my sort of last observation, maybe not even a question, while the tax cap is likely to be 2%, and that could potentially yield an additional contribution to the overall budget of about 3 million. We're not necessarily targeting that number, right? We're going to design a budget that's appropriate for the school district without surpassing that number. But it may transpire, and I understand there's a lot of pressure and interest rates the CPI is high. I understand that our expenditures may be higher next year, of course. But as you prepare the budget, there's always the opportunity to potentially not hit our tax cap and to come in lower than that so that we're not adding to the burden of the community.
Right. And last year, in that slide I just had up previously, we did not reach the tax cap. We were
lower.
Well over $600,000 below what our tax cap could have been.
Wonderful.
So we certainly take that into consideration. I think the purpose of this discussion is to say, this is where we're seeing it trend at about $3 million. But if the board really wanted to go over that and rethink that goal number 2 that you have, then this is the time. If there was something that you felt we needed to exceed that tax cap, then,
Or in the other direction.
Or in
Danelle,
the other
if
direction,
you
or-
felt like just being within the cap wasn't fiscally responsible enough and you
Exactly.
wanted a
And
flat
that's-
budget, we need to know that tonight or soon, because we're designing the budget with that in mind. And I think I want to just echo Danelle's answer to your point, because I think your comment, because I think it's such an important point for the community to hear. When the board sets the goal that says stay within the tax cap, we do not then say to ourselves, oh, okay, we can go right up to the limit of the tax cap because that's all they told. We build the budget that is appropriate for the schools. And we come back to you and we report on what we think that is. And if it
Right.
ends up being well below the tax cap, then that's what we present to you. If it ends up being closer to it, or as last year it was about $600,000 below it, that's the budget we'll present to you.
And I really appreciate that clarification,
Yeah.
both of you. Thank you. And I think I was just trying to underscore and emphasize that while our goal was to stay within the tax cap, if
Mhm.
there are opportunities to be below the tax cap, of course, we should take those opportunities
Mhm.
if it makes sense for the district. So yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
And historically, our budget to budget increase has been in the bottom quartile of the region. You know,
I
all
know that,
across
yeah.
Westchester County, we've been in approximately the bottom quartile.
Yeah, thank you for framing all of this for us and for kind of revisiting and asking if it's in line with our goal. I read the goal, you know, primarily, while it certainly talks about the fiscal responsibility, it starts with the idea of building a program that works for our school district.
Mhm.
And I appreciate, I mean, I think that you've shown in the budgeting in the past, and it sounds like where we're going now, that the priority is to make a budget that works to meet the goals of the district and for all our students, and then make it fiscally responsible within that. So to me, this sounds like all those things are leading that direction. I do also just want to underscore, with the CPI so high and on, you know, costs, just as we continue to be in communication around what those expenditures might be, that we kind of revisit that and just be in communication around that.
Yeah, and I think we've said this. I mean, I think it's, you guys have a process that you work through with all your leadership team and your buildings, et cetera. And I guess I always want you to bring us an idea that you might think is a luxury or something that's like a little pie in the sky. But, I think again, our top priority is to obviously not exceed the tax cap and also be as fiscally responsible as possible. But I think I would always want to hear about a great idea that might, be something that would require funding and allow us to sort of say, maybe we could do that another year or whatever. So, I think we want to hear what's innovative and interesting and you think would help us to grow and improve as a district. And then we can always kind of, as we, spend our Saturday together, we can talk through that.
I don't know if it's too soon for you to comment on this, but another thing the tax cap doesn't allow for is enrollment growth. I wonder if you might be able to make a comment on how we're trending with enrollment at the moment and what you're projecting for next year. Again, it's very early, but if there's something that we can learn from what you're seeing, that'd be great.
Yeah, so we do work with a demographer. We've been in contact with him. We are showing decreases at the high school and at the middle school, and steady at the elementary schools, but then the allocation of where the students are, we're seeing increases in some schools and decreases in other schools. So enrollment will be going down. We have a large senior class that is leaving. So we always look at that senior class that's leaving and then the incoming kindergarten. But it's important just to know that even though elementary seems to be remaining flat, we are seeing different, the school districts having increased enrollment and others.
Interesting. But overall, relatively stable at the elementary population, fluctuations, I'm hearing that.
Right.
And then in terms of overall enrollment, slightly declining.
Yes.
Okay. Due to the negative replacement of the,
Right.
okay.
And we are seeing that in the elementary classes that it's starting to smooth out. So where we've had our senior classes 291 or 280, leaving, our elementaries are our kindergarten, first, second, third grade seem to be in that same 200 range.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Other comments or questions? I think what I'm hearing mostly then, by way of not otherwise hearing it, is that we are abiding by our goal, and I'm not hearing any revisions to the goal. I think we all appreciate the opportunity to reflect on it at this juncture and to know the context that you're operating within. And we look forward to hearing updates as appropriate.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you in February.
Great. All right. Thank you so much. So let's see, this brings us to 8.01, which is our opportunity for public forum. And I know a few people have signed up already. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention for anybody who's waiting to speak with us, but who hasn't signed up, please feel free to sign up. I think we have a laptop maybe at the circulation desk in the back of the room. We will go into listening mode. We respect that this is the public's opportunity to comment and share concerns and suggestions or thoughts related to matters pertaining to the district. And we respectfully request that you try to keep your remarks at approximately 3 minutes. Please let us know who you are, introduce yourselves, and let us know where in the district you reside, if in the district. And with that, it is my pleasure to invite Ashley Lamonic to speak with us, please. Hi, good evening.
Ashley Lamonic. I moved to last year with my little daughter. Love understood. And start by saying that I appreciate the forum. Also appreciate it is how learning was about the fact thing and I was glad to hear about God and that and additionally I first heard from neighbors and night and wondered. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I wrote all over my paper after hearing the update. Parents about you.
Oh, it's on.
The member each letter provided the survey earlier. Voted. So while a survey sounds like a nice way to our service, the letter left little room for direct communication. Thank you. Parents who have concerns about schools being used for a medical procedure that would typically be administered to these young children at their pediatrician's offices. And this brings up a number of questions for my that makes me wonder, perhaps the district or the county who offered this made this decision to repurpose schools without the input of parents. And if so, how long has this been planned? Why? Are the school or district or county benefiting in some way? Sure, one could argue that some families benefit because they appreciate the convenience or because school is a familiar location. But since when is it a medical location? If a child is sick for a few days, do they not need to see a doctor and get a note before returning to school? Is there another incentive to make this change? Where is the transparency here? And is this a sign of more to come? And I understand this is coming from the county, but then I would ask you as the board and superintendent to find out from the county more about if you don't know, is there some other incentive? Is it, why are they doing this? Is this really all there is to it? I'd say this looks like a concerning precedent for room for error and even liability. From the voices that I've heard at these board meetings prior, it sounds like there are plenty of education related issues to spend time and money on. Even though the FDA has granted an emergency use authorization for 5 to 11-year-olds, the FDA's own vaccine information fact sheet states that in addition to known serious and mild possible side effects, the possible side effects of the vaccine are still being studied in clinical trials, still under EUA. What kind of school district has time or money for that liability? I suppose that brings up a different question. Even if it is a small possibility, are the schools prepared to accommodate students who have been vaccine injured, especially on their own grounds? As a prospective parent in the district, I'm saddened to see such a lack of transparency in this regard, and I hope that you can find out more from the county and get back to us. And is it absent those answers, it makes me wonder how parents are supposed to trust schools, especially given the precedent that it starts. And then unrelated, as I was hearing the discussion on budget tonight, I was curious. You discussed state aid, and I wanted to understand in general and in any COVID related state aid, what you have to do or like what requirements you have to meet in order to qualify for that state aid. Presuming that they're not handing it out completely freely, but maybe. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. And I believe Michelle Durivage is next. I'm sorry.
Most
Pardon?
people don't get, can I take this
Oh.
off while I speak?
We prefer that you
Might
leave
be
your mask
muffled.
on.
Okay.
If we could ask you to
I
leave it
just
on,
said you
thank you.
pronounced my name correctly.
Oh, thank you.
Most people
I'm
don't.
glad that I did.
Okay. All right. I'm going to read most of this. So good evening, and thank you for the opportunity for me to have a voice before the board. My name is Michelle Durivage. I'm a former educator and now have young adult children who had gone to KES and John Jay Middle School and John Jay High School. I have personal experience with vaccine injuries, therefore I'm very concerned about the children's safety with regards to receiving the COVID vaccine. But before I address this topic, I'd like to raise a question regarding quarantining, and you may have already answered it this evening. As I understand, at the end of the last board meeting and this evening, there was discussion about the guidelines for quarantine, which are different for vaccinated students. My question is, should children and parents be pressured to get the vaccine in order to avoid a potential future quarantine? Is the thought. I've heard that the district is planning to use schools as vaccination sites. My question is, do we really need to vaccinate our children who have virtually zero risk of hospitalizations and death from COVID, according to peer-reviewed research? There are serious known risk of immediate harm and unknown long-term risk from this experimental mRNA vaccine. There is no FDA-approved COVID vaccine available in the United States. They all have emergency use authorization only and are not covered by the Vaccine Injury Compensation Fund. So these are my questions. How are you going to be liable if children are injured? Number two, whose insurance is covering students with adverse reactions? And what is the limit per claim? And is there a total maximum available claim? Number three, how will you oversee this? What if a student faints or has a severe reaction to the shot? Number four, what resources will be available? Will there be an ambulance on standby? Number five, who will be injecting the shot? Will there be outside nurses from the County Department of Health, or will the school nurse be giving the shots? This is very emotional for me. Pediatricians and their nurses are the qualified experts. Number six, how will these outside resources be able to prevent injecting into the vein and not the muscle? Well, if the shot is injected into the vein mistakenly, it can cause an immediate heart attack. Are you aware that Pfizer has added an ingredient called tromethyamine, which is a blood acid reducer used to stabilize people with heart attacks? I have the link in my notes, and I have printouts of the fact sheet from Pfizer of the ingredients. And number seven, will the parent be accompanying the student? Yes. And children can't advocate for themselves, obviously. That's it. 3 minutes, pretty good. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And next is Erica Glick.
Good evening. Thank you. At our last meeting during board dialogue, it appeared as though you were no longer pleased with the way we've been speaking. We've been asking questions. We've been expressing dissatisfaction with the way things are currently handled in district. We've been offering suggestions and additional points to consider. But somehow we are continually blamed. We're continue to not be welcome as part of the conversation. We are not allowed to participate in the discussion, and we are not allowed a seat at the table. We're parents first. Our children, all of our children, have been deeply harmed and discriminated against. And what's been uncovered is how pervasive this harm has been. To not call out the individuals who sit at the top of this harm would be an impossible ask. We've every right to hold our school board and our administration accountable to this continual harm and discrimination. So are we angry? Yes, yes, we are. When you stand in my shoes and you watch your own children suffer, and then you watch other children suffer, and you are offered more empty rhetoric and no action, tell me you wouldn't be angry and that you wouldn't be frustrated. I've tried it your way. I've encouraged my children to be word detectives. I've told them to check the picture. We've made sight word flashcards. I encourage them to use your Raz Kids subscription. I spent too many years trying to do it the way you wanted me to. And when my kids didn't learn, I knew enough to learn on my own. And I've attempted to share this with all of you, our administration and our board. All I've asked for is a committee or any opportunity to dialogue. And all I've gotten has been more lip service and no change. Change is exceptionally hard to achieve. And sometimes when you are ignored week after week, month after month, and year after year, you certainly get angry. Our nation's report card, the NAEP scores, show that 64% of our children in this nation are reading below proficient levels in this country. And balanced literacy has been the curriculum base of choice since the mid-70s. If you examine the history of our NAEP scores, they've either been steady or they've gotten progressively worse over the last 30 plus years. 10 years ago, 32 million American adults were illiterate. Today, that number is almost 42 million. In 10 years, 10 million more American adults are illiterate. Those numbers should terrify everybody. 80% of our American prison populations are functionally illiterate, with approximately 50% of them being dyslexic. How do we know this? We screen our prisoners for dyslexia, but not our public school children. We are getting this wrong, and our district is no exception. Wrong is wrong, even if everyone is doing it. Actual progress in literacy is very difficult, especially when every individual school district is run and dependent on the decree of the ones at the top, served often without question by those further down in the hierarchy. And too many of those at the top got there by working up through a system and buying into a belief system about literacy that is flat out wrong. And with rare exceptions, they stay above it all. Unquestioned and all powerful, even with so much evidence to the contrary. Our dyslexic children, as well as the 44% of American children reading below proficiency levels, are left behind by curriculums that do not teach children how to read, and in turn, they are blamed for their inability to read. Parents are shamed constantly. Dyslexia is denied. Parents are left helpless by the very schools their tax dollars pay for, while these same schools continue to invest year after year in bad curriculum practices. We are isolated, lied to, gaslit, intimidated, and more. Right here in Gatona-Lewisboro, our students in special education, only 29% can read at a proficient level. I'm going to say that again, 29% can read proficiently. So are we angry? Of course we are, especially when we know that 95% of children can learn to read if they're provided explicit and systematic instruction. What we're doing is not working, and I can no longer approach this broken system with words of praise. You are failing us. Worse, you are failing our children. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe we have one community member who's going to read on behalf of another community member. Is anybody else waiting to speak for themselves? And if not, then Mark Abrams, please join us.
Your battery's just for me.
That's right, exactly. We'll make it work out for you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Mark Abrams. I'm here tonight on behalf of the Special Education Advocacy Group. 2 weeks ago, approximately 35 speeches were given over the course of 2 hours. It was a long night. And as you know, our advocacy group is over 200 members and growing, but tonight our message is simple. First, we'd like to thank Mr. Selesnik for hiring Dr. Fred Volkmar, a professor of child psychiatry, pediatrics, and psychology at Yale University, to visit the district's elementary and middle school self-contained classrooms tomorrow. He is a well-respected expert in the field of autism, and we hope that tomorrow's visit will be the first of many. We're looking forward to learning more about the meetings he will have with the staff following his visit, and the opportunity to engage in a one-on-one meetings with him ourselves. We truly hope that tomorrow's visit will be beneficial and worthwhile. We trust you'll keep us informed as to how things develop. We view this as a model for how we hope this district will begin to treat the other problem areas that so many people have clearly identified over the course of the last several years. Second, because we truly like to engage in an open dialogue with the board, we've chosen to take 2 different approaches than what we have going on here at the board meetings. This past week, many of us sent emails to members of the board reflecting on the previous meeting and hoping to begin one-on-one dialogues. We hope that you will all respond individually to our emails so that we can begin to have a productive conversation. And as we have originally stated 6 weeks ago on October 7th and have repeated at your subsequent meetings, we're planning to host a town hall meeting on Sunday, December 5th at the Katona Presbyterian Church at 4 p.m. This will be live streamed, open to the public, and covered by the media. We plan to model what real collaborative and respectful communication should look like. This panel will be moderated so we can ensure a safe platform for dialogue, one in which we can all share, explore, and learn together. Disrespectful language and behavior will not be tolerated. Also, there's going to be a taco bar, so food always helps. Ms. Schiff, Ms. Hadlock, Ms. Schneier, Mr. Burke, Mr. Garrity, Dr. Rifkin, and Ms. Ostreicher, I hope I pronounced that right and didn't step on it too much. You all have received a personal invitation to attend, and we hope you do so. We kindly ask that you RSVP no later than Monday, November 29th. We hope this will be the beginning of a true collaboration between the Special Education Advocacy Group and the Board of Education. Thank you.
Thank you. Is anybody else waiting to speak? Okay, well, thank you so much to members of the community for sharing your thoughts, your concerns. We're going to turn our attention to the consent agenda, and then toward the end of the meeting, we will have an opportunity for board dialogue. Am I forgetting something? No, okay. All right, this brings us to item 10.01, where we can turn our attention to the consent agenda. I'm not aware of any items board members wanted to vote on separately. And so if that's the case, then would you like to move the consent agenda? Okay, thank you. And it's seconded by Ilana. Thank you. Was there any discussion or questions? I wanted just to briefly mention agenda item 10.02, where tonight we are nominating 2 individuals who have stepped forward to become what would be the Area 10 NYSBA Director, because the Area 10 NYSBA Director has now become the president of NYSBA, which is kind of exciting. And we're very fortunate. There will be other candidates, I believe, but these are 2 board members in Westchester County, one from White Plains, and she also serves on the board of Southern Westchester BOCES. And then another colleague who is a board member in Ardsley and also serves on the Westchester Putnam County School Board Association. So they both bring deep experience. I believe WestPUT is going to moderate a forum to hear from the potential Area 10 directors, and I'll keep everybody posted on that. But we're lucky to have 2 people right here in Westchester County who are willing to raise their hand to represent us. This region covers Rockland, Westchester, I think Putnam as well. And that's it. I didn't have any other comments or questions. If there's no further discussion, we can vote on the consent agenda. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. 6-0. Thank you very much. Okay, and tonight we have an opportunity for a resolution regarding donations and gifts. Would somebody like to move this resolution? Thank you, Rory, seconded by Julia. We have 3 gifts in the amount of $36.50. These are shopping rewards that are going to go to John Jay Middle School. We have other shopping rewards, $288.45 going to Increase Miller. And then from Anna Zabel, who is donating 72 books valued at $322 for the Increase Miller Elementary School Library. So thank you so much to our community and community members for these generous donations. If we could please vote, all in favor of accepting them, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. 6-0. Thank you. And this brings us to an opportunity for some board dialogue. I'm not sure whether any board members had topics for tonight or wish to speak or ask clarifying questions at this time.
I guess I just wanted to just confirm a clarifying question. The vaccine sites would be managed by the Westchester County Department of Health, is that
Correct.
correct? Okay.
And on that same topic, is the school under any liability if there are any problems with that, or is that covered either by our insurance or the Department of Health?
Mel, you want to take that one?
So we had previously been working with Westchester County for a vaccine clinic for just our students. It just so happened it didn't come to fruition with the county. So I had checked in previously with our insurance company. And as long as we're providing it to our staff or our students, there's our insurance policy would cover any liability. If we opened it up to the public, that was not recommended.
There's no further discussion at this time.
I do
Yes,
just want
please.
to add in, I think, I mean, as I said earlier around this, that Westchester has a rich history of kind of being a leader in vaccination and kind of, it's interesting, there was so much interest from our community. We have very high vaccination rates in our community already, right? And we've seen that on our from our staff, as well as students who have voluntarily kind of provided that. I think, if people have questions about, what the right choice is, I know that we've been directing them to talk to their doctor, but I do think it's also incumbent upon us that when misinformation gets put out there, it's not allowed to kind of sit out there, particularly with a disease that is killing thousands of people, where 747,000 people in our country have died from it, that we have to be very vigilant and very active about being clear when a vaccine that's approved by the federal government, that is safe, that prevents people from dying, is available, and what we do with that. So I just don't want to let that misinformation sit in the space here around that.
I guess I would just add that, the comments that we're hearing on this topic, if nothing else, they really underscore the complexity of operating a public school district in a pandemic. I don't think any of us ever imagined that we'd be sitting around a board table, hearing the superintendent apprise us of ongoing efforts to survey our community vis-a-vis interest in children ages 5 to 11 becoming vaccinated on our campus. I mean, it's actually unfathomable when you take a step back and think about the role that public schools are now playing in a public health crisis. And this really is just one of many iterations, from my point of view, of very complex decision-making that's happening in a very fast changing environment, and has been for quite some time now. So I think, I imagine that this is the beginning of another complex conversation the communities around the country will be having. This is not going to be unique to Katona Lewisboro. And, there are a lot of questions and concerns coming from many different points of view, in part because this is uncharted territory for public schools, which is not to say public schools have been completely static forever, but the manner in which our identity as school leaders is fast changing. It's very interesting, the decisions that are being handed over to school districts to be made. I mean, we've been clamoring for local control for so many years, and here you have it, Katona Lewisboro go make some decisions around test to stay and vaccination clinics. So it's very interesting to see where the state chooses to allocate local control and where it doesn't. It's made it quite difficult. We appreciate that you're in constant conversation with superintendents in the region who are also facing these same challenges and decisions. I'm aware that some school districts were in a position to roll out vaccination clinics to kids ages 5 to 11. And one school district said within an hour we were sold out, and we basically became in the business of having to disappoint people. And then we were the enemy, not us, this doesn't happen here, but a neighboring school district that said, then people were just upset. They couldn't get their kids vaccinated and they had the expectation that they could. And yet another district that had 1,000 kids who wanted to, and they were able to accommodate a small percentage. So, I think we'll be living with this next wave, no pun intended, for a while. So anyway, thank you.
If I could, I wanted to say, I know that we probably all have a little pandemic fatigue. So I was so excited to hear the information about Dr. Volkmar's visit tomorrow. I think that feels like, a return to what we always used to focus so much on, which is constant improvement and really kind of looking at what we're doing and considering how we could do things better. So I really look forward to hearing how the visit goes and, what insights he can share with us and, have a great day tomorrow. I'm very excited about it.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you mentioning that, Liz. And I think just hearing you reference the guiding principle that we're always looking to improve. And I do want to add to that speaking of things that aren't static, our reading program is not static and has evolved over time. And there has been public discussion about that. There will continue to be public discussion about that. We're very proud of how well our students do by and large, and we have multiple metrics, not just the New York State tests, mercifully. We really appreciate and value the feedback. We are always listening. We do understand community members are sometimes disappointed, frustrated in their own child's experience in our schools, and we thank you for sharing those concerns. But I do feel the need to also remind our community that our reading program is multifaceted and has continued to grow and evolve in response to student needs and in response to ongoing professional learning opportunities, because we have a culture of dedication to ongoing professional learning, which we very much appreciate. And tomorrow's visit is a perfect example of that. And we are really excited about this visit. And we hope that it's a wonderful day. So thank you. Maybe that's a good note to end our board dialogue, on which to end our board dialogue. And we can look ahead to future meetings. Let's see. Okay, there's only one Board of Education meeting left in 2021. This is the penultimate meeting. We will come back on Thursday, December 9th, 7:30 p.m. In between now and then, the policy committee is going to meet. Is the policy committee going to meet tomorrow morning? Yes. Okay, tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Sustainability will meet next Friday, December 3rd at 8:15 a.m. Finance Committee will meet Tuesday, December 14th at 7 p.m. Facilities Committee meeting Wednesday, December 15th at 7 p.m. Policy Friday, December 17th at 9 a.m. Did I miss any meetings? If I didn't, just also a quick word of thanks to our administrators and to Paul Christensen and to our building principals at the middle school and the high school. Speaking of the Facilities Committee, because those of us serving on that committee had the opportunity to take a deeper dive into some of the aspects of our 5-year capital improvement plan and to see with our own eyes what these items might entail. So thank you for your time and the opportunity to become better educated. And that brings us to an opportunity to adjourn, and I will make a motion to adjourn back into executive session to discuss potential litigation and the personnel employment history of an individual. If I could please have a second for that motion. Thank you, Liz. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. 6-0. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great night.